So welcome to the second session of our Farm to School track this morning, or today. This session is titled Getting Ready and Growing for School Market. So if you were with us this morning, we talked about all of the different regulations and details of school food service and some of the ways that farmers can sell to schools. In this hour we have together, we're going to really talk about how to choose the products and grow for schools. And then if you join us for our last session of the day later this afternoon, we'll be talking with Devon Wilson, a farmer who does sell to schools, and about some of his experience. As well as sharing some resources if you want to dig into this further. My name is Kelly McClelland. I am a community food systems educator with MSU Extension. I'm based in Flint. And I'm really excited to be with you all this morning. Since we've got a smaller group, let's go ahead and start with introductions, and I'll have my other Farm to School team colleagues start, and then we'll just kind of go around the room. If you want to share your name, what farm or organization you're with, and then maybe just a few sentences about your current experience with Farm to School. Are you selling to schools currently? Are you interested in selling to schools? Or are you just kind of here to see what you can learn? So pass it on to Mariel. Yeah.
Hi everybody, I'm Mariel Borgman. I'm a community food systems educator with MSU Extension. And also, like Kelly, I kind of serve the southwest portion of the state and also do a lot of statewide projects too. So yeah, a big part of my work is farm to school and farm to institution more broadly.
I'm Wendy Crowley. I'm a farm to program consultant with the Michigan Department of Education. I work coordinating farm to program work with all of our partners and schools and child care agencies in Michigan, and specifically manage the 10 cents a meal for Michigan's Kids and Farms grant, which is a state-funded grant that provides more money for institutions that put Michigan produce on kids' plates.
Hi, my name is Cheyenne Liberty. I also work for the Department of Education, and in my role as a farm to program consultant, my job is helping our child nutrition program customers connect with suppliers of Michigan-grown food products. A lot of that is through the 10 cents a meal grant, but beyond that, we're excited to support all sorts of farm to school activities. And please feel free to connect with me if you're interested in reaching out to one of our customers. I'm happy to connect you.
Thanks, Cheyenne. Excuse me. All right, we'll start general introductions. You want to start in the back?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Joe Smith. I'm the produce safety specialist at the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development. I work with fruit and vegetable farms all throughout the state of Michigan to promote food safety, conduct on-farm food safety inspections, and answer grower questions about licensing and other ways that I can give resources to growers.
Great, thanks, Joe.
I'm Morgan. I'm a produce safety technician from the Ottawa Conservation District. I service West Michigan all the way towards Lansing. And I do kind of like what Joe does, but I'm non-regulatory. I'm the free confidential conservation district side of produce safety. So, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, we'll go this way, and then we'll circle back here. Yeah, we'll zigzag over.
My name is Anshel Ware. I'm just brand new to it, just learning, getting information, so I can get started.
Fantastic. Welcome. Go in the corner.
Hey, good morning. I'm Shar. I'm here on behalf of my community garden, Harvest Hive, and I'm just starting, just getting as much information as I can so I can start selling to schools.
Great.
I'm Mariel, and we just have a brand new, just got our 501c3 food policy council in Allegheny County, the Allegheny Food Alliance. Interviewed our farmers, and now I'm looking to how do we get our farmers better situated, so we talk to you, get them the training, but also our school districts in our county connected, so that everybody has access to really healthy food.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine Carr. I own Deeply Rooted Produce. We are a mobile grocery store. But we also have a few acres on the east side of Detroit, so we currently sell to charter schools, but I want to get more well-versed in like the public school side of things, because I know they're pretty different, and I would like to get a little bit more formal understanding of the farm school aspect.
Awesome, welcome.
I am Daryl Reed, just here learning about the whole program, trying to get a grant to develop a special needs ranch, so with teaching and growing foods, and if we can extend it to this region, then that would be great.
Really?
I may be in the wrong location, but I'm learning just sitting here.
Hey, there we go. And would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, yeah. My name is Drew. I'm still kind of like a student, but I'm an Edison neighborhood resident, and there's a lot of work going on in that neighborhood for like homestead gardening, and some Zoo City Farms has tried to get some kind of like neighborhood farms going, and the goal is to kind of present more food at the farmers market from local growers, and then there are some schools in the neighborhood that we could potentially improve their lunch program.
Awesome, well, welcome. And thank you all for choosing to be here this morning. So as I mentioned, this is part of our all-day farm to school track. So this session will be specific about choosing products and growing for schools. So jumping right into choosing the right products to sell to schools. Get this to work. So in this first portion of the session, we are going to talk about how your products that you're growing can fit into school meal menus, talk a little bit about quantities and the capacity and needs of school buyers, and talk a little bit, kind of scratch the surface on pricing for school markets. So as a reminder from our session this morning, different schools have different capacity levels in terms of how much processing of product they can do, the type of food service that they're doing. So some schools are operating it in-house as kind of an in-district entity. Other school districts are contracting with maybe a Chartwell's or a Sodexo kind of food service management company. And then some schools are also doing a vended meals contract as well. So knowing these details about the school that you want to work with is really important in having that conversation about what you could grow that would best fit into their menu. So some key things to consider are, can the schools cook food from scratch? Do they have kitchens either at a central kitchen location or in all of the schools? Or are they really just equipped with reheating equipment? That is the reality in some of the schools across the state. Another question to ask is which of the products that you're currently growing or that you plan to grow could be a substitute on the menu. Either they directly meet what's already on the menu or they're kind of a really close substitute to what the school's already familiar with making. And then another thing is, can you meet the volume needs of schools? Depending on the size of a school and a school district, they're serving differing amounts of students each day. You as a local food producer may not be set up to meet their entire volume need, but that doesn't mean you can't be a part of the food that they are procuring, whether that's starting with being a part of taste tests or harvest of the month meals or, local food Mondays or things like that, and then kind of scaling up to being more integrated in their day-to-day food service. And in addition to considering what the school needs, you also need to consider, your operation and what you grow, and what you have the capacity to do with, the space that you have and the equipment that you have. So some things to think about is also the school menu, the capacity. This is saying a lot of the same things, but communicating really what you're growing and how you're growing it to those school buyers. As we talked a lot about in the session before this, you can either sell directly to a school or through some sort of distributor. So that includes a regional distributor, a food hub, and even some of the larger broadline distributors. So we're going to dive into an activity right off the bat. So everyone should have one of these menus. I think I'll pass this one here. This is a menu from the Grand Rapids Public Schools. And it's all of their meals in their high school lunch for the month of March. So we're going to take a few minutes and just absorb this, look at it, maybe take yourself back to your high school days, eating food in a cafeteria. And maybe if you've got a pen or a highlighter, kind of circle or highlight anything that you, or if you're not currently growing, local farmers might be able to provide on this menu. So we'll take maybe 3 minutes to think about that silently yourself, and then we'll kind of share out and talk as a group. All right. What did you point out as things that either you could provide or other local growers could provide based on this school menu? You can go ahead and just shout it out.
The assorted fruits and vegetables, carrots, the peas, the lettuce, broccoli, and collard greens.
Yeah, so
That's about those two.
Potatoes.
potatoes, yep.
Tomatoes, you could maybe have them make a salsa. Tomatoes.
Yeah. So anywhere where there's salsa on the menu, if they're making that themselves, could be local tomatoes.
Blueberries.
Blueberries, yep.
Pinto beans.
Pinto beans, thanks Wendy.
Michigan grows lots of dry beans.
Yes. So yeah, the fresh fruits and vegetables and kind of where they show up are maybe the most obvious, but definitely kind of depending on the level of kind of scratch cooking that a school or a district is doing. I'm looking at, what was I looking at?
How about that dinner roll, Kelly?
Ooh, tell me more about the dinner roll.
Lots and lots of schools in Michigan buy bread from local producers, right?
Yeah,
So, that's always an option.
definitely.
Thinking out of the box.
Yeah.
So schools sell or serve lots of hamburger buns, hot dog buns. They're required to have a whole grain rich item at every meal. So, a lot of times that takes the place of a dinner roll that's why the goldfish crackers are on that menu all those days, because that is a whole grain rich, that counts as a grain for a meal. So if a student's going through your cafeteria line and they don't want the dinner roll, or whatever else that grain is for the meal, they're required to take a grain, so the school will have them have those goldfish crackers.
Interesting. I found what I was looking for. It was the egg roll. I doubt a school is making their own egg rolls, but there would likely be vegetables in it. So either, figuring out who is producing those if it's local, or a really well-resourced school that's making all of their things from scratch, that's an option for local produce as well.
I think you could maybe try and supply the eggs.
Eggs, yeah.
Or even with the onion rings, maybe they don't buy them there, but you could supply the onions. And then I was curious, do a lot of smaller farms grow a lot of grains, like corn and wheat? Do they grow those to compete with other?
That's I know that Michigan grows a lot of grain at a really large scale. So those Michigan bread producers and bakeries are probably sourcing some of their grain locally. I'm not sure what scale those farms would be though. Yeah. Wendy, he mentioned eggs. Any things we should know about eggs for school food service? Or Cheyenne?
Cheyenne's
Yeah, Cheyenne.
Like 4 different agencies that regulate eggs, from the federal to the state. So it's a bit complicated, but generally MDARD recommends that you use eggs from an MDARD licensed processing facility, or schools use eggs from an MDARD licensed processing facility.
That's the Michigan Department of Agriculture and Rural Development.
So that pretty much tells us we don't have a chance.
Well, you can get your facility license, but you might want to produce a decent amount.
Right.
Yes.
I do know of one facility that has tried to do a centralized facility where a number of farmers could bring their eggs to the MDARD licensed facility, but that's not common. So some people have tried to do it that way. So if you've got a lot of farmers in the same area, could potentially work together, to form a cooperative, to have one facility that serves that cooperative. But yeah.
My understanding also is that that requirement comes from the fact that schools specifically are licensed as food service establishments. And so because smaller childcare centers might not have that license requirement, there might be more flexibility for them to work for smaller producers, but it would depend on the specific childcare center.
And schools generally prefer to buy liquid. It's easier for them to use liquid eggs. So, like Mariel's talking about a licensed processor, if they're aggregating eggs and selling them as liquid eggs, right? They're breaking them and selling cartons of liquid eggs. That's easier to use for most schools. Most schools are not cracking eggs and serving a fried egg. They're making omelets, they're making, things of scrambled eggs. And so a processor that is pasteurizing and selling a liquid egg product is much easier to use for schools.
Now, I know we're not supposed to shame them. But it's hard for me to look through it and I mean, even, and just there's just so much that's heavily processed. And like even those, like, you would say in the little gold crackers, I mean, they're heavily processed, and we know the health effects of heavily processed foods on minds and bodies. And I don't know, so I guess the only solution is they bump up their scratch cooking, but then they have to have the capacity, and they have to have the desire to do that.
Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
If you're gluten-free or dairy-free or vegan, what do you get? Just fruits and vegetables? There's almost nothing to eat sometimes on menus.
Schools are required to provide all of those alternative options to students who have those.
But with doctors' notes.
Yeah.
So, I mean, don't you have to have an IEP, or you have to have something within the schools to actually get that?
You don't have to have an IEP. You do have to have a doctor's note. There are also religious preferences that schools have to agree to. So like there are a ton of halal food programs, in the Detroit area where schools are providing, meals that comply with religious and cultural preferences. There are a lot of regulations that require that schools do all of those things. Yes, it wouldn't be feasible for a school district the size of Grand Rapids to provide alternative meals without a medical necessity for every student. Like they're running a business, they have to run a nonprofit business, but you can't feed 40,000 kids a day and individually cook for everybody's preferences.
But if 10% were gluten-free, I mean, it seems like there should be some options.
They absolutely have gluten-free options every single day in every public school.
So is that another?
Actually, sorry.
No.
We have a separate menu for that. Maybe the question is like, we're not seeing those options here on the menu, so there's like different.
Yeah, they have to provide a gluten-free option. It's not really a menu, it's probably, for example, in my kids' school, they have gluten-free buns that are packaged and completely separate. And so while your lunch option is still, a turkey hot dog, your bun is gluten-free. They provide a gluten-free bun, or, whatever that option is. There's beans every day or almost every day, so if you're vegetarian, there are vegetarian options. They can't just serve you fruits and vegetables. They're required to have a meat or a meat alternate, a dairy, a grain, and fruit and vegetables at every meal. It's not a reimbursable meal if they don't give you all of those meal components.
So, as a provider, they're not on here, the lists aren't on here. So if I want to provide the schools with a health option, is it the same channel? Do I go through the same process?
It is the same option. You're like a gluten-free option or something.
Gluten-free biscuit or whatever.
They purchase them at some point, but they're required. They can't. In many options, they can't afford what it costs you to produce a gluten-free biscuit, for example, right?
Okay.
So because they get reimbursement from the federal government, and it's about $4 a meal that they get paid for. So they often can't buy the things that they would want to.
Okay, very good.
I'll also say that on the egg side of things, the protein side of things, if you are looking for a higher price on those, you'll definitely get that more in the direct market than the institutional level. So just keep that in mind too. You can sell fewer eggs probably at the farmer's market here in Kalamazoo for $5 or $6 a dozen, and probably not going to get that for an institutional buyer.
Yeah, and that's one of the things we'll touch on a little bit later, and this is the profit margins on selling to institutions are definitely not as high as those direct to consumer channels, but building this in as kind of part of the many ways that you're selling food that you're growing is a really important thing. All right, any other thoughts or questions sparked by this menu? Yes?
I was curious, like specifically with tortillas, you mentioned budget, but is there like a mandate to get like a higher quality tortilla versus like the one that has all the binders, or like, you know, wheat versus corn, or like?
They're required to serve whole grain rich items. And often, like, the broadline distributors or other vendors that they're purchasing these from have specific lines that meet school food requirements. And so, yeah, they may have different ingredients than your traditional tortilla that you would find in a grocery store to meet those school food requirements.
Thanks, Diane. Yes?
Can I ask that question that we talked about earlier too? Wendy?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so we were discussing what if a farmer was basically doing like prepackaged chili. What would be the processing, or what would be the route to get a school to want to accept that? Or like, what's the guidelines for something like that?
I think maybe the product center would be a place to start.
That's true.
So the short answer to your question is you would need to be able to tell the school this 1 cup or 2 cups, of this chili, or whatever the serving size of the chili contains this much meat or meat alternate, this much bean or vegetable, this much, like a school would have to know exactly where it credits on their thing. So they're required to serve a half a cup of fruit or vegetable at every meal. Does it have a half a cup of fruit or vegetable in it? And it's okay if it doesn't, but you'd have to be able to tell them exactly how this counts, because that's the puzzle they have to put together. Every meal has to have this many of all of these things, right? And then maybe the MSU Product Center is where I would start. So they work with businesses that are formulating, like building those product statements, right? So you'd have to have it processed in a kitchen that's safe and certified. You know, you have to have a health department inspection. You would need to work with somebody to help you build. Can you afford to put enough beans or enough peppers or whatever in that chili in order to make it? And then once you have something that qualifies for a school, then you have the whole challenge of marketing and selling. We've seen that a few times through food hubs, or through like specialty produce or specialty food distributors that are willing to buy it from you and then distribute it. Most school districts aren't making individual contracts. Like, they're not going to be willing to buy chili from you and buy potatoes from you and buy carrots from you, right? They just don't have time or go through all those contracts and stuff. And so unless you have a personal relationship with a school and an in with a school, I would say that you'd be much better off selling it through an aggregator or a distributor. Desmonique, I think you sell through Eastern Market, right?
No, we go to charter schools directly through their food service provider.
Okay. So, I mean, you know, sometimes there's groups of a few school districts that you might be able to get into,
Right.
but I think it would be a hard lift to try and sell directly to schools. I think once you get your product formulation statement and your thing made, I would think that you're looking at some intermediary, right, to help distribute. Flip Fresh is doing some of that work specifically with chili. So he might be a good resource just to ask. He's really great at giving, helping people out, just telling you what he's learned and things about that. You might want to try the director at Flip Fresh.
And if you need a connection to the director at Flint Fresh, you can go through me, because yes, definitely. But yeah, I think Wendy brings up a really good point that we kind of touched on in the last session is, there are opportunities to sell directly to schools, but more often than not, schools are purchasing food through some third-party distributor, like a food hub or, a distributor. So building relationships with those entities in your area as well is really important. All right, I'm gonna move us along. So this is some data about 10 cents a meal fruit purchases, and we'll have vegetable purchases in a second, from the 2022-2023 school year. And I know it's really small to see. It is up on the back if you need to turn around to see better. But basically what you see, the first graph is the number of grantees, so that's the number of food service entities who purchased that specific item, and then the other graph is dollars spent. So as you can see in this school year, apples were overwhelmingly what schools were purchasing in terms of fruit that was Michigan grown, but there were a few districts and food service entities purchasing things like blueberries, cherries, peaches, strawberries, watermelon, grapes. And I know that this information was put together by our MDE and CRFS folks, so any other comments on this information before we go to veggies? No? Number of grantees and dollars spent, yep.
Is this graph available on a website somewhere?
Yes? See?
It's not posted anywhere, but I can email it to you if you sign up on the little data sign up sheet we have, or just email me. My business card is up there, and my name's Cheyenne. I'm happy to email it.
Okay.
We have 21 to 22 data available, but that's the most recent year. But we have an evaluation report that has a breakdown of all the different foods purchased and tried and wanted still. So yeah.
Yeah, the trends should be consistent. So
Yeah, trends
so
should be.
check out the evaluation report for sure.
Definitely. And then this is vegetable purchases. So again, as you can see, looking at the, they both say number of grantees. It's more products. Okay, fantastic. I was like, wait. So peppers have been really popular, cucumbers, salad greens, lettuce, tomatoes, asparagus. So a lot of those things that you all pointed out as, served fresh or minimally processed on the school menu. Oh, and here's the dollars spent for all of those. All right, we're going to talk briefly about identifying the volume of product that schools may need. So as we mentioned before, the needs of schools vary depending on the characteristics of that school and that school district. You may have a farm that's producing enough to produce, all of the carrots that a school needs for their food service. But based on growing seasons and based on capacity, that may not be the case. But that shouldn't deter you from, being interested in supplying to schools. So you'll definitely want to work with the school buyer or any sort of intermediary that you're working with to determine what that volume is that they need. And one thing specifically, if you're working directly with the school, is they're going to be thinking in terms of servings of vegetables and meeting those really complex requirements we talked about in the first session. So what they're thinking is going to be servings, and servings correlate to, that grade of the kid or the age of the student, and how much vegetable needs to be on their plates and things like that. But you as a grower are thinking in pounds or thinking in, other units that you're used to delivering in. So just to show you, you don't need to know what's on this slide. It's definitely way too small to read. But this is an example from the USDA Food and Nutrition Service Food Buying Guide that school food service directors are going to be incredibly familiar with. And this is where, they're going to calculate, I need 100 servings of carrots. That means I need about 10 pounds of carrots from, wherever I'm sourcing my carrots from. So again, this math won't be something that you as a farmer will need to do, but just having that awareness that this is, the calculation that a school food service director will be doing.
So for the carrots, that's where the Valley Hub comes in handy, because then they can take those carrots, wash them, and get them into the little carrot sticks, because the food service directors probably don't want, all that carrot tops and everything to.
Absolutely, and it depends on the infrastructure that they have in their school kitchen or in their central kitchen or in their processing facility. So yes, absolutely. So food hubs across the state, and specifically Valley Hub, are really working hard to make sure that it's as easy as possible for schools to purchase locally grown food, and that's by taking on some of those processing steps. There are some schools, like we were just talking with Matt from Detroit Public Schools Community District, they have, pretty good processing infrastructure, so they can kind of tackle some of those tougher, more processing heavy fruits and veggies that they grow themselves and also from local growers. But some schools, like I've worked with the Flint Community Schools, you know, they have a central kitchen that has your basic cooking appliances, but definitely nothing to process all the carrot sticks for the students or something like that. So keeping in mind that schools have different infrastructure, and again, this goes into just having that relationship with the school who's buying. In addition to food that is prepared or cooked, salad bars, and then fresh fruits and vegetables through the Fresh Fruit and Vegetable Program are opportunities for locally grown products as well. So the other thing to think about is how often a school needs a product. So, you know, if they're used to weekly deliveries from a broadline distributor, it may be an adjustment to receiving deliveries from you as an individual farmer. Definitely depends on storage capacity. Schools generally have limited cooler space and storage space, so that's something to consider as well. And definitely if you want to be able to provide product throughout the season, which Mariel will talk about in a second in her section, thinking about some succession planting and planning your crops for the entire growing season is important too. And just to reiterate, if you are just getting started, if you're interested in dipping your toes into growing for schools, that micro purchase level, or even providing food for things like Harvest of the Month or Farm to School Month activities or taste tests or classroom lessons may be a fantastic place to start. And I can add some value as the farmer too, if you go to the school and talk to the students about how you grow it, where you grow it, why you grow it, and they can pepper you with all the questions that they have. And that's a real value add to the schools. We already did the activity. We're going to touch very briefly on pricing for farm to school. This is by no means a comprehensive pricing presentation. We can definitely get into those specifics with you some other time if you're interested. But like I mentioned before, it's important to acknowledge that farm to school or farm to institution is not going to be your highest profit margin within all the market channels that you could pursue as a farmer. But if you can get to that high volume reliability, if you establish yourself as a vendor with a school, you know, it's kind of at least within the school year and over the summer for summer feeding, it's a guaranteed customer that needs food at a pretty high volume. So again, we'll say this a million times, it's all about working with the school, establishing that relationship, or figuring out what sort of other intermediated market works best to sell into schools. And it's important to know your cost of production to be able to make an informed decision if the prices that a school is able to purchase at will even make sense with your farm and your farm business. So again, just kind of touching on what we touched on in the first session, there is some sort of bidding and contracting process that's different, whether a school is doing a micro purchase, a small purchase, or a larger purchase that needs a full bid process. But really that process and what the school is looking for in that process will determine the price that they're able to pay. And your prices for farm to institution or farm to school are going to be closer to your wholesale prices than to your direct to consumer prices. This is an example of an enterprise budget. Anyone in here familiar with enterprise budgets? Mariel, yeah. So there's a ton of resources about how to use these and what they are, but basically it's way too small for you to see here, but it's a breakdown of all of the costs related to production, transportation, processing, if there is any, of a specific crop for a specific year. So you can really write out, I think this one is tomatoes. So what are the costs that go into producing tomatoes?
We just had a webinar about this. That was recorded. If you go on MSU Extension's website, it's under, I'll write it up here actually, called My Ag Ideas to Grow With, and it's recorded on there so you can learn more about it.
Beautiful, thanks Mariel. There's also some wholesale pricing guides through the USDA Ag Marketing Service that are really good resources that I'm sure were probably touched on in that training as well. So to reiterate, not all of the products that you grow or that you produce will be a good fit for farm to school, but figuring out which, will work in your business model and for the specific schools that you're working with is important. And finally, the last time I'll say it, relationships are important. Connection with a food service director is really going to be your key to success in this if you are selling directly to schools. So I will end my portion there. I know that was a lot of information and kind of just skimming the surface on a few things. Mariel and I and Wendy and Cheyenne and Megan, we're definitely here if you have any questions, or specific questions about your farm or your business related to selling farm to school. But at this point, I will turn it over to Mariel to talk more about the growing side of things.
Awesome. All right. So for this section, we're kind of going to build on a lot of what Kelly just talked about. So exploring our capacity for selling to schools, a little bit about price points, it's a little bit of repeat, but we're going to get a little bit more into your farm infrastructure, talking a little bit about maybe potential for scaling up if that's something you're thinking about, or just planning for those higher volume quantities going to schools. And also we're going to talk a lot about food safety in this section because that really comes into play when you're thinking about selling into the institutional market and particularly into the school setting. It's young eaters, they are more of a vulnerable population, so food safety becomes pretty important. And then we'll talk a little bit about distribution, kind of like how do you get your food from your field to the school. All right, so first section we're going to talk a little bit about scaling up. Okay, so we heard a little bit about each of your farms, but show of hands, who currently is selling directly from your farm? Like maybe you have an on-farm market or a roadside stand, okay. What about through a food hub or a co-op? Yeah, farmer's market? A little bit of that, okay. Food processor, anybody selling to a processor? Or a distributor? Okay, so that gives a little bit of a sense. So usually when you're selling direct from the farm or a farmer's market, you may be starting, this is not necessarily true across the board, but a lot of those vendors tend to be more on the small scale side of things, have a lot of diversity of their crops. And then when you move into like the food processing or working with a distributor or selling to an institutional market, a lot of times you're doing larger volumes, maybe of a more limited. So maybe instead of growing 35 different crops, you're maybe focusing on 5 or 6 that you grow really well. Not necessarily always the case, but just kind of as we're talking generally. But there's a lot of skills in those markets, those direct-to-consumer markets that are also really applicable when you're talking about school markets because, as we've been saying, it's all about building those relationships and those communication skills. So if you're selling to the other markets, you already probably have a lot of these skills that will transfer really well to working with school customers. So if you're thinking about potentially expanding your farm, potentially focusing on maybe a smaller diversity of crops and growing them at larger volumes, one of the things we really want to encourage you to do is focus on sustainable growth. So thinking about your farm holistically, thinking about your business plan, your financials, and kind of where you're at currently, and then where you hope to grow in the future, and making sure that you're taking on new investments in tools, technology, things like that, in a way that is going to kind of grow as your farm grows. So you don't want to like take on a ton of debt, just to serve one school market, especially we know those margins are low. So really kind of be thinking about this holistically. How does this sales channel balance out with your existing sales channels? Are putting in new buildings, maybe packing facilities, upgrading for food safety, adding in potentially new tools and equipment that are more efficient for harvesting or planting. As you're thinking about all of these things, make sure that it makes sense with your business plan and your financials, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're in over your head with debt or anything like that, just to service one market. Okay, so also we want to talk a little bit about adding labor as you're potentially scaling up and growing your farm. You may need to hire some more employees. So just a few things to keep in mind, especially if you don't have any employees currently, if it's just you on your farm. There's a lot of information that you should look into about labor laws and how to do things the right way. So be sure to check out these resources. Are we sharing this? Is that what this email is for, or is this 10 cents only?
That's 10 cents.
Okay. We should have a sign-up sheet too to share this presentation, because there's a lot of good links and stuff in here too that we don't want to make you have to look up on your own. So lots of good information out there through the federal government about knowing the federal and state laws for employment. And then also you'll have to set up a payroll and accounting system. So thinking about how you're going to plan for managing all of that extra administrative work, payroll, taxes, things like that. So again, these are just things to think about. If you're going to scale up to service the school market, you may need to add additional resources, additional folks helping out on your farm. These are things you may have to consider if you haven't already. And obviously we want to be providing safe working conditions for folks, so making sure that you're set up to manage people in a way that is safe and you have a good working environment for folks. Where to find people to work on your farm is a real challenge. Does anybody have employees right now, or are y'all kind of working? You used to? Okay.
You want to do it right.
Right, exactly. To pay people a living wage is very expensive. And it's hard to find people that have skills in agriculture too. So I know there's a lot more emphasis on kind of training new farmers and beginning farmers and having opportunities for kids to learn about farming and agriculture. But it's really, as y'all know, that work on farms, it's a very specific skill set. It's very highly skilled labor. And it's finding people that are really good at what they do, that are efficient, have a good work ethic. It's hard work, all conditions of weather, backbreaking labor. So it's hard. So a couple opportunities of where to look for folks is the Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Development. They have a specific agriculture employee services program. So you can reach out to them. Also the MSU Student Organic Farm, which has the Organic Farmer Training Program through MSU. They have a listserv that goes out to everyone that's been a part of that program and has graduated. So those are people that have been trained in agriculture through a whole growing season long education program. So they send out a monthly jobs and opportunities newsletter, so you can put your job posting in there as well. And also talking to other farmers of what has worked for them, what hasn't worked for them in terms of recruiting folks is another good strategy. All right, so moving on a little bit more into the side of like your capacity, your infrastructure, that kind of thing. There's a lot of different things to consider. So one of the things is not every school is exactly the same in terms of what they're requiring of you. So it's important to kind of have those open communication channels with school food service directors to figure out what are their specific requirements. If they're part of a food service management company like Chartwell's or Sodexo or something like that, that's often dictated like at the corporate level. So those individual food service directors aren't necessarily making those individual decisions for their school or school district. It's really kind of handed to them. These are the requirements. Other schools that may be self-operated may be choosing these types of requirements for themselves, or they may be handed down. So you might get a mix, and there's no like uniform standard necessarily, other than the federal requirements that they have to adhere to for meal programs and food safety. So when it comes to like exactly what they're looking for, you just might see some variation. So that might be in your food safety, which we'll talk quite a bit about in future slides, so I won't go into that too much now. But any kind of production standards that they're looking for, whether they're looking to have stuff prepped, washed, and that kind of thing prior to coming in, what kind of space they have to receive deliveries. So all this stuff might be unique kitchen to kitchen. And also their accounting system might be unique and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of different things to consider, your accounting system as well, and then your capability to manage staff if you need to add more folks. Okay, so we talked a little bit in the last session about schools have like $4 to spend on a meal. So how do you meet the budget needs of the school? So one of the things is being able to provide that volume so that you can potentially offer that price point that they need because you're producing more of it, and also having a consistent quality, and that's something that they're expecting because they've been buying from distributors for a long time. Everything is sort of graded. They're getting a very uniform product, so they'll have that expectation that your product will be consistently high quality. Billing is tricky. School requirements of billing, it's probably different. It's not like, at a farmer's market, you're getting the money right then, right? At the school, it might be 30, 60, hopefully not 90, but maybe days before you get that payment. So it's something to talk about up front to make sure that that doesn't impact your farm's cash flow needs. And then it's really important when you're having those pricing discussions to not agree to something that is not meeting your own farm's needs to be financially successful. I know we all want schools to be serving super great healthy meals for our students, but if you have a particular product that you're going to be losing money on to sell to a school, that might not be the right fit for them. We want farmers to be succeeding. And the 10 cents a meal does help with that, but it's always a conversation, and we want to make sure that you know what costs you have and what price you need to sell it at to be successful. Okay, so has anybody used lot codes before on your product? Do you have a traceability system, or you don't know what I'm talking about? That's okay too. Okay, so the traceability is basically like a fancy way to identify your product back to your farm. So if you're selling a box of carrots to a school, for example, how do you know where that product came from on your farm, when you harvested it, all of that information? And then the school also has that on their end. They know which farm it came from, when it was harvested, what it is, how much is in there. So this is information that usually goes on a label when you're selling it to a school. It probably also will go on your invoice, some of it. And so typically, instead of writing out all of that information, you might write out some of it, but that's a lot of information to capture. So people will use a lot code, which is essentially just a set of numbers and letters that you decide. You pick, A stands for this field on my farm. B stands for this one. So you kind of develop this system that works well for your farm to know like where things come from. And then you kind of make that into a little code on the package. So a lot of times we use this in food safety too, to figure out like if there was a recall on something, could you be able to trace that specific box of product back to where it came from on your farm? So yeah, that's just a way to code information so you don't have to type out this really large thing. But this is often a requirement of schools to have some kind of standardized labeling and packaging of your product.
But it seems like if it came in, if you bring it in and it comes in from the field, and then once it's washed, it'd be all mixed up. It would seem like it'd be incredibly difficult to say that that spinach was only from that particular person, that picker.
So that's why you get to decide what that information is that you collect, right? So you can say my lot code is going to trace all of the product that I harvested on Thursday. And I know that this crew was working on Thursday, maybe not that individual harvester. Okay. Yeah, there's flexibility in that. Mm-hmm.
Is this something new?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think this is something maybe newer for smaller farms to do. It's something that's been pretty standard, I think, for larger farms for a long time. But I think...
So if it's new for smaller farms, we can expect that it's going to become more regulatory.
So it is regulatory under the produce safety rule with the Food Safety Modernization Act. That's kind of where it's coming from on a food safety standpoint. But in terms of just tracking where your product is going, for good record keeping and sales and that kind of thing, that part is not regulated. It's more just for your own benefit. Did you want to say something, Joe?
Yeah, so just to clarify a little bit, the traceability rule is its own rule. It's part of the Food Safety Modernization Act like the produce safety rule is, but it's a separate rule that is going to come in. It's finalized, but it's not going to be enforced until 2026. We don't know. FDA is working on getting resources available to us to the states, while also trying to determine who's actually going to enforce that rule. So there are going to be certain, to my understanding, there's going to be different kind of statuses for farms, so I don't know how much it'll apply to like extremely small farms. I haven't read through the rule too much to comment on it completely, but I know that we're working through it, so it's not something that's like immediate that you have to do tomorrow or something.
Yeah, thank you for that. So yeah, but this is mostly, again, for coming from the schools, right? So buyers are going to expect this kind of information on the label, whether it's regulatory or not. This is what the buyer is going to be asking you for, which is why it's part of this curriculum. But yeah, potentially for food safety, you may have to also do that. So that's actually our next topic. So it's a good segue. So food safety, there's no like one, there's no like one standard that every school requires. So some schools will require you to go through some kind of third-party verification of your school, or I'm sorry, of your food safety practices. Some just want to know what you're doing. They may ask to see a food safety plan. They may want to know that you are in compliance with the Food Safety Modernization Act, produce safety rule. So there's just, it's kind of the Wild West out there. So this again is like why it's important to have those conversations with the food service director to figure out what they need. And we've also found that a lot of times they don't know exactly what they need. So you also might have the opportunity to provide some education about some of the great programs that we have in Michigan for food safety verification. So we'll kind of talk about a lot of that. But has everyone heard of the Food Safety Modernization Act, or FSMA? Yeah. Okay. So I won't go too much into that, but just to know that this is a rule that exists, and we have lots of resources to support you in that, and we'll talk about some of those later. But that is kind of like the federal minimum standard, and then you can also have these third-party voluntary certifications on top of that as well. Okay, we have more slides on food safety later, but we're kind of going into like, this section is more like, what are those food service directors looking for? So kind of talked about the packaging. I also didn't mention in packaging that there's like specific standard sizes of cases and things like that. So that's also, again, part of that conversation. Are they looking to have, X number of bunches in X size box, or do you have some flexibility there? Okay, so next up we have insurance. There's lots of information out there about insurance, finding what's a good balance of what your farm needs, as well as what the buyer may be requesting that you have. So Farm Commons is a really great resource. They have a lot of just legal information in general, but they have good resources around insurance. ATRA, if you're familiar with that publication series, ATRA has a good bulletin about whole farm revenue protection, and then the food liability insurance program, I think, is more for like value added, if I'm remembering correctly. Have they?
Help with food producers, but
oh,
it's
good.
Also like food producer that also may do what's that called? Bringing people to your farm, agritourism.
Oh, agritourism. Mm-hmm.
If you do deliveries and things like that, it is
okay.
for enterprise. I don't remember if they have a product for farmers specifically, but it's like a farmer who has a farmer's market on the farm and all that stuff.
Oh, that's good to know.
Services.
Thank you.
And that's Anthem, you said?
No, FLIP, FLIP, or Food Liability Insurance program.
That's good to know. I'm going to look into that. We have some nice bulletins with MSU Extension as well. These are part of our Beginning Farmer Demand series. There's insurance options for fruit growers and insurance options for vegetable growers that kind of go through the spectrum of different things. And these are free to download on our website. So all you have to do, basically to find everything on our website, the best thing to do is just either Google it or put it in the search bar or email one of us and we'll send it to you, because there's a lot of information up there. It's hard to navigate. Okay, I think do we only have 5 minutes left? Is that accurate? Okay, we're gonna have to like speed through a little bit of this, but it's okay. So again, just remember what the schools may have in terms of their kitchen. as terms of thinking about what you're going to offer them. So obviously if you have watermelons for sale, if they are able to cut up that many watermelons, that's great, but probably a lot of schools aren't able to do that with their level of staffing and time allotment. So think about what products you might have that are just kind of ready to go for schools, or think about maybe partnering for that processing. So we kind of did this already with that menu activities. I'm not going to go too much into it, but the first level to think about is like, what can you just use in its raw, unprocessed form? Then kind of the next step up would be lightly processed. So that's like chopping, having things pre-washed, bagged, that kind of thing. So this is where you may want to work with a food hub. If you are really into this and you want to try to explore setting something up on your farm, there are grants out there that can potentially help you. If you stop by our booth, Community Food Systems, we have a Grants for Farmers handout, so take a look at that. But there's going to obviously be regulatory things to consider there. So if you have capacity to do it on your own, that's great. Otherwise, maybe working with a food hub. Also kind of that next level, maybe freezing products, doing pre-cooked products. This is probably something you're not going to do on farm. Most likely you'd be partnering with a processor to do that kind of thing. But again, there are grants available that can assist with getting equipment to do processing. So again, food hubs. One of the things that I don't think we talk enough about is how you can add value to your product just by talking about your farm and who you are and the practices that you implement on your farm. And so not only talking to your customer about that, but also educating the students in some way. So, you know, going to the school if that's possible, or finding some other way to share your story in the cafeteria with like a picture and a little story or something, so you'll be able to connect those students back to your farm. That's adding a lot of educational value. So you get that. I know y'all do. I'm gonna skip over some of this processing stuff just in the interest of time. Let's see. Yeah. This is all kind of just about the logistics of working with the processor. So more communication about when things will be ready, how you're gonna get the products to the processor, how it's then gonna get from the processor to the school. So just more considerations and more talking points. So if you're working with a processor, a food hub or something like that, you're just adding another layer to that supply chain. So another layer of communication. There's also cost to that, right? So when you start processing product, costs more. So you're likely going to be having to figure that out with your processor, your food hub, and figure out how that fits in with your margin that you need to make as well. All right, breeze through some food safety standards. There's a video in here we don't have time to watch, but you can watch this on YouTube. It's the Michigan Farm to School video series all about food safety. So I encourage you to check that video out. Finding food safety requirements, a conversation. Again, there's no real actual like overarching rule other than farmers have to meet all of the local and state regulations around child nutrition programs. They may have additional requirements. They might want to see your food safety plan. They might want to see a third-party audit, that kind of thing. We're not going to get much into meat. Most of this today is focused on produce, but there are obviously for meat and for eggs, which came up, separate regulations there. So there's lots of information about that online, or you can connect with one of us and we'll help connect you. Also, if you're working with a distributor, they may have their own food safety regulations too. So it may not just be the buyer that has their food safety regulations, but your distributor may require something from you as well. So that's also something to know if you work with a distributor or at the food hub or a processor. You may have to figure that out. So we talked about the Food Safety Modernization Act. There's also something called GAP, or Good Agricultural Practices, which is a voluntary certification that you can get. So a lot of times people get those two a little bit mixed up. So we like to have this slide to just kind of show the difference. So FSMA it's the law, right? It's kind of what you have to do no matter what, although there are exemptions and exclusions. We have a whole workshop about this and lots of people to help you. So I'm not gonna get into those today. But basically this is a regulatory program. There are periodic inspections, and then if you're not found in compliance, there could be corrective actions, that sort of thing. With GAP, it's not regulatory. It's a third party coming in just to verify basically that you're doing what you said you would do in your food safety plan. It's typically something that's asked for by a buyer, and it involves an annual audit, which is different than an inspection because it's not regulatory, right? So if it's not that it's like a pass or fail sort of situation, and you would probably lose the sale if you didn't get your certificate, but it's different than a government regulation program. So that's kind of an important thing to know because, again, there's a lot of food safety acronyms and things like that, and they kind of get mixed up. Lastly, I want to talk about our amazing Michigan On-Farm Produce Safety Program. So we have two awesome people in the back that can provide tons more information about this. They have a booth here as well. But Morgan's team in particular can go out to your farm. They can provide free and confidential produce safety assistance. You can just have a simple farm visit, or you can work on this Michigan Produce Safety Risk Assessment, which we have copies up here for you to take. It kind of goes through all the different aspects of your farm. This is a really, really good just kind of overview. You can even look at this on your own and just kind of see where you're at. There's like different levels of risk, so you can kind of go through and see where you fall on that spectrum of risk. And this is totally aligned with that Food Safety Modernization Act produce rule. Super great program. And they actually, if you go through this with the technician and you write a food safety plan, you can get a certificate from that program as well. And it's free, which is different than the GAP program, which you have to pay quite a bit of money for. So that's super cool. And we have, it's hard to see, but they have this flyer on their table. So there's technicians that cover the entire state. So you can find out who your local technician is and get connected with them to get help with produce safety. And we also have their information up here as well. So we also at MSU Extension have an agri-food safety team that works really collaboratively with the team at MDARD and the produce safety technicians. So you can reach out to us too. MIFS, who puts on this conference, also has a lot of resources around food safety. And then we have a group GAP program in Michigan, which is a different way to get GAP certified, but it's the same USDA GAP certification. So if you want more information about that, come by my booth and we can talk about it. All right, we're only like 3 minutes behind. So
We'll give you 3 minutes.
Okay, here's our evaluation for this part of the session. So please fill that out and we can do questions while you're doing that. And also don't forget here, is this it? No, that's not it. In your program, there's also a session evaluation too, which is different than this one.
Double evaluation.
Sorry, we make you do two evaluations.
Sign up sheet if anybody wants to get a copy of this.
The slideshow, yeah, thank you.
Oh, for both sections?
Yeah, we'll send all three.
We'll send all three, yeah.
Yeah, questions, yeah.
Farmers forming sort of cooperatives to increase
Yes, I do.
Capacity, or like they all want to go in on gap safety. Is that something that
So
you recommend?
the group GAP is kind of that, but for sales, yes. So Zoo City Food and Farm Network is a really good example of that. It's a collective of individual farm businesses that are all selling collectively. I think that collaborative marketing in general is a trend that we're seeing, not just for institutions, but for CSAs and things like that too. So definitely, yeah.
You said group gap?
Yeah, group GAP is basically a way for farmers to kind of all get certification as part of a group, and then the group gets audited. There's lots of details to it, but essentially you don't necessarily get audited every year by the USDA. You'll get audited every year by a member of the group. And then the whole group gets audited by USDA. Yeah.
If you go through like a food hub, is that a similar process then? Like, does the food hub get checked?
Yeah, it depends on the food hub. But for example, like at Valley Hub in Kalamazoo, they are requiring all their vendors to go through the produce safety risk assessment, or at least at first have a visit from their produce safety technician. And then they have their own like food safety regulations that they have to comply with, like with the local health department and MDARD and all of that. So some food hubs have farms that would go through, like Value Hub has GAP certification for their farm, and then their food hub also has like all the MDARD and local certifications as well.